They mean that the crime would have been a reply to some to the will not to do peace by Israel. It's absurd. Hamas does not want peace, as we all know. And Hamas has one program, one will, which is to build a state from Jordan to river, which means annihilation of Israel. So the crime, the October 7, happened in a, not in a vacuum. It appeared in a full mess of words who were saying grossly, we want a state from Jordan to the sea, which meant disparition of Israel. This is a reality which has to be reminded to Mr. Gutierrez, to a lot of chiefs of state in what is called, in the very despicable way, by the way, the Global South, and so on. Second remark, we hear all over the press, the television, the places where the general conversation is built and fed, we hear that the Hamas, this terrible organization who wants to exterminate Israel, was fed, financed, created by Israel. We hear that on and on. Honestly, I'm not a fan of Benjamin Netanyahu, is the least I can say. One could find in my weekly column in Le Point various articles which I wrote since the 90s, where I said that Netanyahu is not only not my cup of tea, but I think he is a danger for Israel. But this idea that Israel built Hamas is just a propos de table. It's a gossip. It's an urban legend. The only thing which probably Israel did under many prime ministers was to try to deal with those who were elected in Gaza, to try to save peace, probably. There was, and I know a little, many of the prime ministers who hold the seat since 20 years. There has been always this idea that peace had to be saved as much as possible, even with people like Hamas, as long as they don't commit mass murders as the one they committed on October 7. This has to be very clearly said. And honestly, I don't know any clear evidence, any clear statement, except private conversation reported in off-the-record violations of any prime minister saying that Hamas had to be fed in order to divide the Palestinian power, or to split the Palestinian authority. Another thing we hear a lot since this terrible crime is about the disproportion of Israeli reply. It's right to wonder about proportion, because a just war is just when the aim is just, and when the method also is fairly balanced. It's a real question, which is raised by all the theoreticians of the just wars, till recently the American philosopher Michael Walzer. It's an important subject, important question. It can be discussed. My feeling, I was in Israel just after October 7. I'm following, as all of you, what is concretely happening on the ground. I am rather familiar of the methods of IDF, of Tzahal, and I do believe that Tzahal is behaving in a proportionate way. Warning before hitting, giving ultimatum of 1 day, that becomes 2 days, that become 1 week, that became 2 weeks, in order to encourage the civilians to evacuate. Sometimes on the Saladin Road, which is open 6 hours a day, escort or try to escort those who take the road and who are prevented to take it by Hamas. All that means to have the concern of civilians, to try to have as little civilian casualties as possible, and all this means to have in head the will to do a well-proportionated war. Of course, there is huge numbers of casualties, and this is unbearable, unsufferable, that's sure. But we cannot say that Israel is acting in a disproportionate way. And by the way, I would be happy to know from those who accuse Israel of that, what would be the proportionate reply? What will be the alternative strategy? What will be the alternative tactics? And it's like for Ukraine. I was recently, the last days in Washington, and I heard a lot of people telling me, but Ukrainian army does not have the good strategy. Okay, what is? What do you propose? What is the alternative strategy of tactic? Generally, there is no reply, and it is the same for Israel. The fourth remark I would like to do is that there is one alternative strategy. Oh, yeah, there is one, to be honest, which is proposed by a part of the international community, which is ceasefire. Ceasefire, stop of fights. Stop of fights again. It's necessary when you have to convey some humanitarian aid. Stop of fight is necessary when you have to take out some hostage, which has been done, as you know, recently. But a ceasefire which only result would be to help the Hamas to regroup, to rearm, to reshape and to rebuild their systems of defense and of attacks. It is only a way to lengthen, to prolongate the war and the casualties and so on. A ceasefire was not asked to, you quoted, Mr. President, you quoted the film I shot, I directed about Mosul, the capital of the caliphate of ISIS. I was there with the Kurds, embedded with the Kurds, then embedded with the Iraqi army, the Golden Division, and I made a film out of that, which is available on the platform of TV French channel, German French, called Arte. I never heard, when I was there, from November 8, 2015, till January 10, 2016, I never heard a call for ceasefire. I never heard any responsible leader of the free world or of the world asking to save ISIS, to allow ISIS to regroup or to escape. Never. First time we hear that about a terrorist army is now when Israel is fighting against Hamas. And this has to be stressed and repeated on and on. About the hostage, a lot of observers, probably often with goodwill, I'm sure, often, say that there is a contradiction between the two requirements, the two obligations, the two tasks of Israel. Number one, to destroy Hamas, and number two, to liberate the hostage. That there is a double bind, that there is the jaw of a horrible dialectic, etc. Again, it's true that Israel is probably facing the most complex operation of liberation of hostage in the whole history. Israel has an experience of liberation of hostage, and Entebbe and others, certainly never as complex as this one. But if you are honest, if you try to look genuinely at the situation, it is difficult and it is contradictory, but not as much as they say. The only way which Israel had, and America, and Thailand, and France, to have some hostage liberated, the only reason why Hamas decided at a point to negotiate was because they were pushed by a strong force, they were under attack, and they were in front of an army who decided to be merciless against them, Hamas. So force has been, alas, I hate to say that, but force has been the only reason which made some, not all, some of the hostage being liberated. About ceasefire again, and about Mosul and the fact that it's the first time we ask ceasefire, some say, okay, but you cannot compare. You cannot compare Hamas with ISIS, and even less, you cannot compare Hamas with Hitler, which is absolutely right. Nothing is comparable with Hitler, and it will be an offense to the victims of Holocaust to compare anyone to Hitler. But to say that Hamas is a weak organization, small organization, in a little strip of earth, Gaza Strip, which is, by the way, very small, but let's have the proportion, 10 times bigger than the city of Dubai. The Gaza Strip, you probably know, Gaza Strip, his total size, 360 square kilometers, is 10 times the dimensions of Dubai city. It's more small than the whole Dubai Emirate, but it is the size, it is 10 times bigger than Dubai. So Hamas is not a little organization in a little confetti of territory. And for one reason, and of this we have to be aware. Israel is aware, civil society is aware, Sahel is aware, and we have to be aware for one reason, which is that Hamas is not alone. Hamas has some allies, not only Houthis and not only Hezbollah. Hamas belongs in the new game of the new world in which we entered 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, belongs to a club, belongs to an international of sponsors or allies. Iran, for sure, Russia, for sure also, with Moscow is the only place where the Hamas leadership were received with red carpet before the pogrom of October 7 and after. So we are facing not an isolated kamikaze group, despaired and so on. We are objectively in front of one piece of a chain which partly molds and shapes the order or disorder of the world today. And this, again, is not sweet to hear that, of course. I would much prefer Hamas to be nothing, but it's not the case. They are part of a huge movement of authoritarian states, of dictatorships, of illiberal organizations, and so on. And we have to take that into consideration. When I was a younger philosopher, I was, as I still am, a militant of human rights. But I remember a text of one of my elders, a great French philosopher called Claude Lefort. Great French philosopher, very respected and respectable, Claude Lefort. And he wrote 30 years ago an important text called Human Rights Are Not a Politic, which meant that if you want to act in a just way, if you want to act fairly in the world, you have to take into consideration two things. Again, difficult. Human rights. Every life is sacred. That's absolutely evident. But also these old things which the ancient Greeks invented, which is geopolitics. If you are only considering geopolitics, you are a sort of Kissinger. If you are only considering human rights, you might miss the main point and generate, be responsible for many more, and in a much larger scale, human rights violation. Last point, or not exactly the last. Does it mean that international community, UN, Security Council should not act, should not involve, should not pressure the actors of this war? No. International community exists, even when it dishonors itself, as it is often the case with Israel. UN exists, and I am among those who hope for UN sometimes to be useful. But what sort of pressure, what sort of action should the international community take? What sort of initiative? The only thing I hear is that they should twist the arm of the war cabinet in Israel, or propose another tactic or strategy which they don't have. I would dream of an international community, of an ad hoc group of states, of the Security Council, recommending, urging, pressing the Hamas for surrender, for example. Why don't we hear that? Never. An appeal, a call, a pressure on whoever, the sponsors and so on, for the surrender of the high commands of Hamas. I don't hear that. We have some surrenders. We saw recently very awful images, by the way, of surrendering low-grade soldiers. But a call, solemn, by international community, saying that the leadership of Hamas has committed the hugest, the most huge crime against Jews since Second World War and is oppressing the Palestinians, that they lost any authority, that they have to, their place is in front of the justice, I don't hear that. And more precise, we have some countries who pretend to be players in this war, who pretend to be honest brokers in, for example, the exchange between hostage and detainees in Israel, Qatar, or Istanbul. They are members of an organization which is not perfect, which is called Interpol. You know all Interpol. Why don't we hear? This would be a good pressure of international community. Why don't we hear UN urging Qatar, urging Istanbul to arrest Mr. Agnier, Mr. Meshal, Mr. X or Y, who is in Istanbul? Why don't we see the Security Council recommending some Interpol mandates of arrest against these guys? This is possible tomorrow. America, France have relationship with Qatar. We speak with them. The most important American base in the area is not in Israel, is not in Egypt, it is in Qatar. So we have ways of, international community has ways of intervention on Qatar. Very simple thing. Arrest Ismail Haniyeh. Arrest Khaled Meshal. They committed huge crimes. They should go on international court. This would be a good way for international community to do pressure. Last but not least, I hear on and on the television stages, in the news also, the idea that, okay, Israel might do a necessary war, we can understand that, Israel has the right to self-defense, but they have no plan for the day after. They have no plan for the day after. What is? They should, before entering in war, before eliminating the Hamas, they should say what is their plan. I don't think so. I don't think so because, first of all, and I am, to be completely, for those maybe who are not familiar with the French intellectual stage, I am among those in France who have constantly been partisans all my life, since 50 years, of the recognition of the rights of the Palestinians. I was one of the godfathers with my friend Bernard Kouchner of a plan which was called the Geneva Plan, and so I supported everything, the Plan Rogers, the Plan, the Saudi Plan, the Geneva Plan, the Ehud Olmert Plan. I know all of them, the parameters of Clinton. I'm in favor of everything, except that, A, there is a time for politics and a time for elimination of the worst criminals whom we saw since long. And number two, okay, to negotiate with terrorists when it is in order to save a baby or a family. But to speak now of the day after, to design now the shape of the future Palestinian state, what does it mean? If not a huge credit, a huge bonus to Hamas. What would it be for the entire world if not the following message? You see, when you commit crimes, terrorism, more than terrorism, crimes against humanity, it pays. The solution of the two states, which was buried, on my point of view, wrongly, they revived it. So Today, it is the worst moment to speak of the two-state solution. The time will come, of course, one day, when Hamas will be destroyed, when we will not see any longer 68% of the population of Cisjordania in favor of Hamas. The time will come, but not now. By the way, another argument which we hear very often is that it makes no sense to pretend to destroy Hamas, because if you cut a head, you have 10 others. We hear always this sort of wording, which is again a proof of despise incredible for the Palestinians. I believe the opposite. I believe that when you inflict to a terrorist organization, to a fascist state or proto-state, a real defeat, it does not encourage future vocations. It decreases, it calms, and the future vocation in an incredible way. When Hitler was defeated, of course, there was some remnants of Nazism here or there, but we had a new Germany. When a democratic one, when Al-Qaeda was defeated in Afghanistan, for some years, this is another debate, the decision to leave Kabul, but for a long time, we had, after the defeat of the Taliban, the remnants of Taliban went underground, and the women went in the street proudly, and so on. So I don't believe at all that a defeat of, a military defeat of Hamas would regenerate it. On the contrary. So this is for me the situation. And last word, of course, when I see myself, and I'm sure you too, and I'm sure all those who are here, when we see the images of this war, images of the 105 or 8 Israeli soldiers who have lost their life during the war, when we see the images of the thousands, we don't know the figures, of Palestinians of Gaza dead. We don't know the figures because I don't trust the figures of the minister of Hamas. But anyway, a lot. Of course, it is heartbreaking. Me, it breaks my heart. You probably, it breaks your heart. But the last thing I wanted to say is that those who pretend to have their heart broken, those who pretend that it is unbearable, that they cannot stand it, and that they have to go in the streets to protest by thousands, tens of thousands, in London, hundreds of thousands, those, I suspect them to be less sincere as we are here, for one reason. For one reason. The 100,000 who were in London, the tens of thousands who would be in the streets of Paris if the demonstration were allowed all the time, strangely enough, I never saw them. I never saw them when Syrian civilians were killed by hundreds of thousands. I did not see them even opening an eye when Boko Haram in Nigeria, a country which I know, I reported there for Paris Match, which you quoted, when Boko Haram committed horrible crimes. They did not care. They did not give any attention to that, to Boko Haram, to Syria, to Darfur, not to speak for the eldest among them, of the Muslims of Bosnia. I remember when, with a few friends, we organized demonstrations in Paris for the Muslims of Bosnia. We were a few dozens. They did not care. So Why? Maybe because they were less informed and there was less images, then please, they should admit that they are victims of propaganda and that they should think twice before becoming blind. But the most plausible explanation is that they don't really care about the peace in Palestine and between Israel and Palestine. They don't really care about the human lost lives of Arabs in Syria or elsewhere, and that they care only when Jews are in the game. They care only when Jews can be condemned, and this has a name. I'm sorry, but the name of that is pure and mere anti-Semitism. These were the remarks I wanted to propose you for the end of this important meeting.
Thank you so much. Very interesting.